keep in mind that the audience might not be all that technical.
Yeah.
Okay, let me read what you've got here.
Yes.
Starting to move beyond just calling it open source library, integrate more full-featured OSS into our software. Two best examples are Linux routine and Salt Stack. Provide a full-featured Linux operating system in our CRIO and CVAC controllers, integrate with our Airplane software. The Salt Stack, a popular configuration management system, as a major component of the systems management part of NXG. Okay, so yeah, where you want to go from
Those are just kind of notes for me. So maybe just kind of going through and kind of explaining, like, I don't know what, like, Linux is, for example.
Okay, gotcha.
And stuff like that. Sorry
okay,
about that.
yeah. Okay, so every time you pretty much go to a website, you're using Linux nowadays. You just don't know it. It's kind of like behind everything. So when you hear people say cloud, 90-something% of the machines, the cloud is a fancy way of saying someone else's computer on the internet. And in this case, that someone else's a data center with a lot of computers that are helping Facebook to work and helping Gmail to work and whatever. And the vast majority of those are running Linux as their operating system. So like the Mac you're using right here is using Mac OS 10 as its operating system. This is using iOS as its operating system. Well, the internet that you're, like the Jive on, this NiTalk is probably running on a Linux server. So when you actually edit your documents, you're using Linux under the hood. Similarly, our customers who are using LabVIEW to maybe program a control application or whatever may not know what's behind it. Like, you didn't know that. You don't even know you're using Linux. Similarly, our customers use LabVIEW and our data acquisition capabilities and all that to program their hardware devices to do something. And Linux is kind of underneath that, making it possible, as one of the things making it possible. That said, though, Linux is one of those that for the power user developer types, they want to crack up, get underneath the hood and take advantage of this massive set of capabilities that it has. We're only enabling a certain, subset of those, but there's a lot more that you could do. And the fact that we're using Linux under the hood means that now, there's a lot of additional tools that work with Linux that people can bring in on their own, and they are. And Salt is kind of you could think of Salt like almost like an air traffic control system for planes, is what Salt is for Linux devices. Like, it can manage lots and lots of devices running Linux and or Windows and make sure that they have the right software installed on them, that they're configured properly, they can connect to the right network, that if there's any problems with them, like if they're if they're running out of disk space or any number of things, like it can help you to manage all of these devices, which when people are buying a lot of compact Rios or a lot of PXI chassis or things like that, they want to be able to visualize the system, they want to be able to say, do this here, do that there, whatever, right? And that's what Salt is kind of the thing behind the nice tools that our customers work with. We write the thing that our customers actually interact with, which is Skyline, and there's another technology that I can send you the name of. They just named it, but I can't remember it. But we're making the front end tools, if you will, the thing that the user interacts with. But underneath, all the infrastructure for systems management and device management is leveraging this Salt technology, which is an open source project. So Linux is Linux kernel, I should say, is an open source project, and there are a set of projects around that are also open source. So Linux is almost like a community of open source projects, not just a single one.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess my kind of question with that is, so you're saying that they've just started. So is OSS kind of a new thing that NI's been trying to develop into their business offerings? Has this always been happening? Kind of just like, what is the scale of the OSS program?
Okay, so yeah, you have to go back a little bit. It's definitely not a new thing.
Okay.
Open source software really started in universities and labs, things like that, like Bell Labs, IBM, and it was just really a way for people to share what they were making, right? And they weren't really concerned about trying to, shrink wrap it and make money off of it. They were trying to achieve some goal with it. And so the idea of burning it onto a CD and selling it at Office Max for $20 was the furthest thing from their minds. And so they're sharing a lot of this content. In the course of them doing that, they ended up making some things that have kind of had persistent value. Generally, and I have a whole presentation on this that I'd be glad to show you, but basically it started at the base level of capabilities of a system. So the stuff that you would never see. I mean, internet browser is so high up the stack. There's so much going on underneath that to make it work. And the very bottom of that stack, which is just like basically the system that makes it so that when you input things on your keyboard, it's registering those and able to translate them to something that the system can manage and all that. Those base level infrastructure pieces. The Linux kernel does that. And so it's those low level infrastructure pieces that started to become open source. And no one wanted to own those, so everyone was just trying to figure out, I mean, Microsoft did, that's what Windows is, but a lot of people don't see the value in trying to sort of own those independently. So a lot of that infrastructure became open source, and then everybody's making it better. There's kind of a book on this called The Magic Cauldron. It's an essay. I can send you a link to it. But he tries to explain where open source came from. But yeah, basically it's people who are scratching their own itch, solving whatever problem they need to solve, and then working with other people to sort of continually make each of those things better. And so it started in infrastructure. And as far as NI is concerned, you say right here, yeah, here we go. I definitely wouldn't put this information in the very first sentence, but that's kind of beside the point. But Boost, Xerxes, XPath, what those are examples of, you've never heard of those. Most people have never heard of those. And that's kind of the point. They are things that programmers know about. They're libraries and tools that are available to programmers to help them do their jobs. And open source has had, I think, the biggest impact there, which is tools for developers to be successful. But what I think is interesting is, and we used it for that. Like, we use Boost. Boost is a set of libraries for C++ development. Xerxes is a set of libraries, I think, for like some sort of XML file management stuff. And we use those where it makes sense, because it's kind of like, well, it's free and it helps me, so why would I not use it? So it's obvious, right? What's happened in the last 10, 15 years or so, especially with the rise of the internet, it's gone beyond just tools that help developers do their jobs to Linux, an operating system that you can run in the data center, and like a web server you can run, like actual applications that you can run that are open source, that compete with the best things out there that are closed. So like Microsoft has owned for years a web server technology called IIS, and there's this open source web server called Apache that's basically overtaken it, even though IIS is a commercial product with commercial backing and support and documentation and everything you would expect, because it's just open source tools have they've commoditized. They turn software into kind of a commodity and make it so that it no longer makes sense to try to make money off of that. So once Boost was created, nobody was going to make a sellable alternative to Boost, because why would anyone use it? And open source is kind of eating the software world from the bottom up like that. So what we're having to do is react to that, and in some cases help be a part of it. So like now that Linux has become like the right operating system to use for our needs, we started using it and building on it, making it better, and working with that community to help to direct its future, and making that work for us. Rather than writing our own systems configuration stack, our own systems management software completely from scratch, which was our original plan, we looked at this and said, actually, this fits a lot of our needs. And so we started working with that and integrated into our stuff, so we didn't have to write it. It's kind of like reuse. Reuse is a really important thing with software. And then we're able to sort of take advantage of all the things that it has on day one, right? Like that we didn't have to invest in, right? So there's a community angle to that too, because Linux didn't do everything we needed right out of the box. Salt didn't do everything we needed right out of the box, but it did enough of it that it was worth it for us to
work with it and adapt it.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. That all makes sense. And then I think my next question is kind of, so that's kind of where NI is right now with OSS. So kind of what does the future of OSS look like? What are kind of projects that NI is trying to do? Or like where kind of does this all go in the next 5-10 years? If you can make any kind of prediction.
One weird thing that's happened in the last several years is corporate involvement in open source has gone way up. Like, I mean, I'm the head of open source for application software at NI, and I'm a part of this thing called the To-Do Group, which is in my post, where I went to Dropbox's headquarters and met the person who has my job at Google and GitHub and Twitter and Facebook and on and on and on.
Yeah.
And because companies are realizing that it's a smart thing for them to do, to invest in doing this right. So I think a big thing is that corporate involvement increasing and more companies figuring out how to collaborate. It being more important for us to consider how we can work with other companies and other companies and people who are just doing it for their own interests to build and create stuff that we all share value from. So it's.
Do you feel like OSS has more, I guess, like even more impact because NI is such a B2B company?
I think OSS has an impact because we work with scientists and engineers.
Okay.
That's our mission statement, right? Scientists know about open source. Engineers know about open source because if they use tools, if they use tools to create anything that's got software, they've heard about open source. They might not know a lot about it, but they're familiar with it. And in the academic space, the ethos of academia of sharing and making things that are better for the world and sharing the knowledge that you create fits with creating software that you share and whatever. So there's a lot of, like, I guess you could call it a real ecosystem. We use that word a lot, so it's kind of gross, but like an ecosystem in the sense of there's a lot of organisms with different needs, but by them all sort of solving their problems in their own ways and working together where it makes sense, like they're able to sort of make something that's better for all of them. And so what I see happening with things like there's trade associations like the Linux Foundation that we're a member of, and they enable us to sort of have conversations with the right people at Siemens and Toshiba and all these other companies and talk with each other about what we're doing and see where we can pool our investment towards something that'll add value for both of us. So in a way, open source isn't all that different from like a standards organization, except they do something more powerful than create a standard. They create something that works, right? Standard organizations just describe a specification or something. And maybe they'll have a reference implementation, but open source software is a real implementation that actually works for people. We can go inside if you want.
Oh my gosh, we might need to. I am so sorry. I think
worries.
the wind's blowing in my face. And I'm like, oh god, sand. Yeah, I used to have glasses, but now that I switched to contacts, like I feel like my eyes are a little bit more sensitive because they're still adjusting.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Is that here?
Yeah. So I think that's the big thing is like open source had a reputation for a long time of being kind of the reserve of like hippies, honestly. I mean, people with long beards like me. And I think it's become a lot more corporate in the last 10, 20 years. Microsoft had a big Microsoft Heart Linux outbound message a couple years ago, and I think that's just an example of where, and they were like probably the most hated by the open source community in general company, and they
for Windows. And
exactly, because they're completely closed, and so anyway, I think that's the biggest thing is there's two things. One is the corporate involvement has grown so much that companies can collaborate, but the other is that the nature of the problems that open source is solving keeps growing. It was just developer tools really, and it's become like full-on application stacks that run in the cloud that are the back-end infrastructure of major corporations. The biggest corporations, Google, right, runs on Linux. So yeah.
That makes sense. Okay, and then I guess going into here, so I kind of pulled your 6 major points from your email, and then I went to your post, and I kind of grabbed things as they seemed to make sense, and I popped those in there.
Okay.
So I guess with reuse, I was kind of hoping for a simple example or case study I could use to kind of flesh out that point.
Yep. So reuse, I would say Linux and Salt are the two big ones.